We're going to talk about the gentrification of the secondhand economy, which I know is quite the niche topic. We're going to talk about it specifically in Ontario because there is a massive scandal happening in Ontario right now. It's a little bit of a war between some very big brands that has gone public. Normally, when there are industry wars between brands, you don't hear a lot about it on social media or whatever, but the gloves are off in this particular case. And especially if you follow me on LinkedIn, you'll see where a lot of this heat is being generated. So if you are interested in this subject, find me on LinkedIn because there's a lot of good gossip there. But basically, what's happening is the secondhand economy in Ontario is experiencing a gentrification, and there's a pushback to that. And that pushback is coming through in the form of monopolization. So what Ontario has to decide right now is whether we are going to create a diverse, robust market and suffer the cost of gentrification, because I won't pretend that there aren't any, and we're going to open all that up today. Or are we just going to protect the model as is, let monopolization take over the industry, stagnate the commodity, and keep things as they are without innovation. And this is the issue with gentrification in general, is that it's the price of progress at the end of the day. So just to break it down, let's go back to real estate first, because the term gentrification is usually applied in real estate and it's the easiest way to understand it. So just very simply, you get parts of town that are really nice and then parts of town that maybe not so much. And there's a concentration in certain areas of people that are very low income. And when I mean low income, I'm talking the lowest possible denominator of income before you're actually housing and secure. And sometimes there's a lot of overlap there. In those areas, things tend to be a bit different, right? Your landlord knows not to bother with a credit check, or you might get away without having to go through a credit check in certain parts of town. They're used to dealing with people that are on some kind of government assistance, so there's no stigma there. So these areas become, this is Giorgio and his bum, these areas become safe haven for low income residents that have a place where they can belong and they can get by. It might not be easy, but at least, there's services in the area. There's other people of a similar demographic. There's a community that builds in these areas. And for the people living there, these areas, as dilapidated as they may be, are a saving grace because things are kept affordable in those parts of town, because local businesses, what few there may be, realize that their shopper just doesn't have the money, which means it's the lowest possible margin on any commodity that's sold in that neighborhood, from rent to food to coffee to everything, okay? Then what ends up happening is you get a few what's it called, hipsters that move in, right? And suddenly there's a kombucha market or whatever that opens up. And as soon as that starts to happen, we see property values go up, right? This is what gentrification is. So property values start to go up, as does everything else. So because the margins are suddenly getting higher and the income level, median income level, starts to increase of the people that are populating that area, the price of everything in that area goes up, including rents and expectations in terms of securing housing. So when that starts to happen, those of the lower income get pushed and squeezed out. And because of urban sprawl, these little safe haven communities are shrinking very, very quickly, leaving the people that are dependent on finding areas like this without a place to go. So gentrification does have its drawbacks. However, with population increase, with the need for innovation, with the need for a population density, with the need for creation of jobs, when we get those hipsters move into a neighborhood and you see cafes open and restaurants open, and it does hurt that small demographic of person, but we can't forget that at the same time, it's also lifting up an entire city, right? Because as these areas begin to develop and create commerce and affluence, that lifts everybody up, and it provides more opportunity for those that are maybe able to get into the workforce. But before I even finish that sentence, understand that those that are at the lowest rung are never going to be potentially employable. There's either mental illness or physical illness. So there is an entire demographic of person that, despite the services and the resume help and whatever that we offer, they're just not employable. And gentrification puts this demographic of individual at risk more than any other. Now, where the secondhand market is concerned, there are concerns for this demographic of individual also. So when we say secondhand market or secondhand economy, the first thing your brain probably does is go right to thrift stores. And if we follow that train of thought, then your brain will probably say, well, that would be Value Village, Salvation Army, Goodwill, right? The three big ones that your brain goes to. And who's the average shopper at that kind of a store? Right? You don't often get a lot of middle class and up. I mean, there's that hobby thrifter, which has become a little bit cool, and that actually is part of the gentrification movement. But for the most part, people that shop that level of store is usually somebody on a really, really strict budget. And someone who's shopping at that level, they can't afford even a marginal increase. And it's really important for those of us that are part of the gentrification of the secondhand economy, which I'm very much guilty of, not textile waste diversion, which I'm vice president of TWD. They're a hauling company. They really don't have anything to do with the gentrification movement, but my co-ownership and production of a reality show around the secondhand economy definitely does. So what happens in this situation is, because most people associate thrift stores with low income, there's a stigma. And in Ontario in particular, used clothing was very stigmatized. So it was considered for the poorest of the poor. Now, that's starting to shift with the gentrification movement. So what ends up happening here is we're making it cool. So there are other stores that have opened up that do not market for a budget person. What they're marketing for is for a frugal person, and there's a big difference. So, for example, I'll give you a perfect example of this. So, there's a store in Toronto where I'm producing the reality show. They specialize in high-end vintage goods. So, you're not going to see anything under Zara level in this store. So, you go from like Zara up to Valentino. So, we're showing you Valentino, rare Chanel pieces, that sort of thing. And the store specializes in that. So when you go to that store, it doesn't feel like a Value Village. You know what I mean? It doesn't feel like you're there looking for a budget. It's beautifully decorated. They've got velvet benches, the whole bit. And the stuff is very carefully curated. So unlike the big mass stores that you used to have to go to before, and you'd look through, 1,000 pieces where maybe you would find a gem, the new sort of version of thrift store that we're seeing opening up in this new economy is actually quite carefully curated. So you're getting beautiful items that you normally wouldn't find. And the target market for that store is actually somebody who has a professional job, like in the office. And I'll give you a great example. I spoke to a government employee not long ago who's the head of a department in a municipal government. So they have a great job, which, they're making great money, right? And she said, yeah, I make great money, sure. She says, but because of my position, I'm expected to dress and look a certain way. But I have kids and a mortgage and, whatever. And I don't want to blow half my paycheck on clothes just to make my boss look good. And that really resonated with me. And there's a lot of people that are in that position right now that want to be fashionable, that want to look good, but they can't afford, the $600 jacket or whatever. And in a carefully curated thrift store, you're getting stuff often brand new with tags that are a third of the price of what you're paying retail, and nobody would know the difference. So it has become a big trend. So what we're seeing now is a new kind of thrift store chain open. There's several different ones, but one that off the top of my head, Plato's Closet. You've heard of Plato's Closet, right? So even the name, sounds a little bit more alluring than, it's not targeting that I know you're really broke and you need to be able to buy 5 pairs of jeans for $3. You know what I mean? It's more like, I know you need some retail therapy. You can get twice as many clothes as you could brand new retail. So it's a complete different messaging going after a complete target market. So you would say, okay, well, they're not really then in competition with Salvation Army and Value Village because it's a totally different demographic. Uh, this is the thing. First of all, what ends up happening is people that are used to now going to the Plato's Closet version of a thrift store will then go to Goodwill and be like, I didn't see anything. This store, I could get this. I don't find that here. So the expectations start to shift, and that puts pressure on these big box charity stores that are used to being able to sell high volume at a very low price. People are now becoming quite discerning. So they would rather have 2 pairs of designer jeans than 10 pairs of fast fashion jeans. And fast fashion is now really starting to get a bad rep. So people are starting to align more to a better brand that maybe they couldn't afford brand new unless they bought it thrift. So now suddenly the stigma's going away. There's also some economic indicators that happen right around the time that a secondhand economy will blossom. Usually has to do with the property values going up while income is staying the same. Now, I know we just did have a small increase in minimum wage, which actually negatively impacted the secondhand economy, to be honest. When that happened, many sorting facilities in Ontario, that wasn't the only decision, it was not the only reason, but it was the final nail on the coffin. And many sorting facilities have closed down in Ontario, have now moved to Dubai and Pakistan, where labor is far more affordable. Now, the big problem that we're having is, okay, so expectations now are put on Salvation Army or Value Village that they can't keep up with these fancier stores. And there's something else too. They also start to increase their pricing now. So right now, and I don't know this for a fact, but on average, those real thrift, shops for people that are low income geared demographic, you're looking at a $5-6 medium price range for the stuff that they carry. These higher end thrift stores, you're looking more in the $11-12 range. So what ends up happening is this now puts the pressure on Value Village and Salvation Army. Not the pressure, it actually gives them the permission to increase their price. Hey, if so and so is selling a t-shirt at $8, then I can sell mine for $7 or $6. You know what I mean? Because it's still going to be cheaper, but maybe a little bit more than they used to sell it for. So the ripple effect of gentrification does have a negative impact because, like I said, if you're a parent who's really broke, even just a 50-cent increase on an item can be the make or break of whether you're able to afford it. And for someone who's directly responsible for gentrification in the secondhand economy, I feel that I would be remiss to not acknowledge that fact. And I'm sure that there's a part of Salvation Army, diabetes right now that are lobbying very hard for control of this industry, is because they're trying to fight that gentrification. Because what happened is, remember I said there's economic indicators that kind of open the door for this sort of expansion and blossoming, and that's what happened. So all these mom and pop shop thrift stores started opening up, and we already have thrift store chains that exist in competition with Salvation Army Value Village. That would be Talese, National Thrift, or two. There was a company called CCI that I was working with to develop a new brand, plus just Thrift, the store that I'm developing the reality show for. They were planning a huge expansion, and all of these were going into direct competition with Salvation Army and Value Village. And again, in a gentrified way, which means their marketing was more dynamic, they were more efficient in their process, and they were just cooler. Right? So they would have been more attractive, their inventory better curated, they knew what they were doing, this was planned. Okay, so the secondhand economy blossoming meant we would have had a lot more thrift stores, a lot more mom and pop shop thrift stores, and also a lot more organizations collecting used clothing to supply the thrift store market. So what we were seeing was a massive competition start to happen. Now, I like to see competition in the industry as much as it undermines my operations of textile waste diversion that I'm constantly having to keep ahead of all this new competition. But at the same time, when that's happening, what we see is the commodity prices start to go up because there's more stuff being collected, everybody's bidding on trailers, we got places to send it overseas, and everybody's happy. So when that's happening, things are good. But when we see monopolization start to happen in the industry, what we see is stagnation and the commodities start to crash. I could tell you stories of organized commodity attacks in Canada. Maybe one day maybe that'll be my next class. But for today, let's stick to the topic of this gentrification fight that's happening. So what happened is Markham decided, well, first of all, no, I was the first. So let's let's just call it what it is. So York Region selected textile waste diversion, and I'm the one who spearheaded this. Selected textile waste diversion to design the first ever curbside and bin collection model for a municipality, and I did it for for Aurora and Stouffville. So we put in bins, we did curbside collection, we studied it, everything was wonderful. And then I wanted to scale it so that it would actually be productive. And City Council, of course, squashed it, which is why I don't believe municipalities should be involved in these decisions, because city councilors, they look at the bins and say, I don't like the way they look, but they have no clue about economic development or how their local decisions have a negative impact on global trade, which it does. Because remember, only 20% of the stuff that we collect in Canada is good enough to be sold in a local thrift store, even the real budget ones, even the low level ones. So we still need to find a solution for all of the other stuff, which right now is export. Everybody's going to do a collective eye roll because I said export, and the CBC has worked very hard to malign the export industry with used textiles. You have to understand that it's a billion-dollar globally traded industry, and $1 billion is nothing. And the reason it's so small is because it's been undermined by Goliaths. However, $1 billion is still something and worth developing, especially in a time when we're having issues with international trade. This is an undeveloped resource that we could really be capitalizing on. But as long as cities like Markham are imposing programs that literally take the 25% the sector was already collecting and they just collect it instead. They haven't actually increased the amount that they're diverting from textiles, from landfill, which means they're not increasing the capture rate, and they're also not increasing the commodity that's being collected that's available for us to trade. So how are we supposed to, as exporters and economic developers, increase or develop emerging markets around the world if we don't have clothes to sell them? We had a situation after Markham where there were some facilities in South America that froze to a halt because all of a sudden the companies that collected in Markham that used to sell to those little sorting facilities overseas or markets overseas were completely froze out. So all those investments that were made by Canadian businesses elsewhere died as well. So when we're having waste department officials making localized decisions that have a ripple effect that decimate global trade, and then CBC does virtue signaling reporting to justify it, we have a problem. And when those very same organizations are using their lobby power to push the press and to push municipalities and to push politicians to create motions and use language that demonizes everybody but them, we have a problem. And anytime you see monopolization happen in a sector, we have a problem. So it's not that I don't value what Salvation Army offers a community. It's also that I don't understand that diabetes sucks and it would be great if we have a cure. However, I don't think that every other disease that's being researched should be disenfranchised so we can cure diabetes. My parents have cancer. That's my priority, So I want to be able to see everybody benefit from this commodity. I want to see bidding wars happen again on trailers. I want to see the emerging markets that have been stagnated overseas be developed. I want to see green tech get funded. There's a lot of things I'd like to see, but that can't happen without diverse players. So what's happened now is Diabetes and Salvation Army, along with Markham officials, are lobbying municipalities to replicate what they've done in Markham. What they've done in Markham has already hurt our economy. If we were to start doing this municipality after municipality, we would be decimated on the global stage, decimated. The only company that would have any stock to move would be Savers, and the charities that collect for them, which means everybody else would be put out of business. And that cannot and it won't be allowed to happen. There will be a pushback to that. There is a pushback to that. So if you are interested in seeing the secondhand economy grow, if you're looking at seeing the whole thrift stigma disappear, if you understand that progress, there's a price to progress, but however, you can't not progress, you know what I mean? Because there's some issues with progression. If you understand what I'm saying, I urge you to reach out to your elected officials, municipal governments, and tell them that the diversified private sector needs to be protected. There needs to be ample participation by a diversity of stakeholders, and diversity is not just Salvation Army, Value Village, and other savers lapdogs. There are other organizations, Canadian-owned organizations, that are growing and blossoming if we would just allow them to. And the abomination that Claudia Marsalis calls a program is not the way to do it. And 2 weeks, I'll be at Seneca College at their Textile Waste Symposium on a stage with Claudia Marsalis, and I'm hoping I have the opportunity to tell her to her face their textile program sucks, and everything they're bragging about is bullshit at the end of the day. They're collecting all these millions of pounds that we were already collecting before they came in and took it from us. So you know what I mean? They didn't invent anything. They're virtue signaling, they're bragging, they're being braggarts, they're arrogant, they're using broad stroke insults to paint every other participant as fake who does not fit their little glam squad of friends, you know what I mean? That's not going to fly, and it's not going to last long. There's a pushback. And there's a pushback. Have a great day, everybody.